Okay, here we are. We're talking about Purim, and this is video number 2. And watch the other one before you watch this one because we're halfway through this story now. And I'm going to start in Esther chapter 5, verse 3. Then the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you." And Esther replied, "If it pleases the king, let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet I have prepared." So the king said, "Bring Haman at once, so that we may do what Esther asks." So the king and Haman went to a banquet that Esther had prepared. As they were drinking wine, the king again asked Esther, "Now what is your petition? It will be given to you. And what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." That was a typical response. Esther replied, "My petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question." Esther is strategizing here. She is building Haman up so that he is full of pride and he digs his own hole between the 24 hours between the banquets. And so here we go, chapter 5, verse 9. Haman went away happy that day and in high spirits. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. Calling together his friends and Zeresh his wife, these are evil people too, including his wife and his 10 sons, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways that the king had honored him, and how he had elevated him above all the other nobles and officials. "And that's not all," Haman added. "I'm the only person that Queen Esther invited to accompany the queen to the banquet that she gave, and she has invited me with the king to do it again tomorrow. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate." His wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Have a gallows set up for him. Then go to the king to the banquet and enjoy have a gallows set up for him, reaching up to the height of 50 cubits, and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai hung on it. Then go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself." This suggestion delighted Haman, and he had the gallows set up. So let's look at what's going on here. That night, the king could not sleep. Why couldn't he sleep that night? He just had wine at Esther's banquet. He should have been passed out. But of all nights, he couldn't sleep that night. So he ordered the book of Chronicles to be brought in and read to him. Now, usually what a king will do when they can't sleep is they'll order music or bands to play, or they'll have women of a harem come in. But this time, he didn't ask for that. He asked for the book of Chronicles to read. And so it was found recorded in there that Mordecai had exposed those 2 officers. Remember I told you about those 2 Tarsian officers that were standing at the gate and they were plotting King Xerxes' assassination. And Mordecai had reported it to Esther, and Esther reported it to the eunuchs, and they reported to the king, and they saved his life, and they executed those 2 soldiers. But nothing was ever done with Mordecai. Now, of all nights, of all places to read in the Chronicles, I mean, there's wars, there's kingdoms, there's all kinds of information in these Chronicles. And that night, the night before Mordecai was to be killed, he reads in the Chronicles that Mordecai saved his life and was never rewarded for it. Being rewarded for saving a king's life is a right. And so just remember that when you do something and somebody overlooks you and doesn't give you recognition for it or reward you for it, God sees you. He has it written down. It's in his remembrance, and he will reward you for that in due time. So let's go on here. Let me find my place. This is great, you guys. You're going to love this. Okay, so what honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this kind act? He asked the eunuch. And the eunuch said, nothing has been done for him. Then the king said, who is in the court? Well, guess who's in the court? Haman is there bright and early, ready to ask the king to kill Mordecai. And the king had just found out that Mordecai saved his life. And so the king said, who's in the court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai in the gallows that he had set up for him. His attendants answered, Haman is standing in the court. Bring him in, the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? He didn't give a name because he wanted impartiality. He wants to know an honest answer. Well, the king is, or Haman is so full of pride now that he thinks, well, who would the king rather honor than me? So he thought he was talking about himself. And so this is what Haman said. For the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe that the king has worn, and a horse that the king has ridden, and a royal crown placed on his head, and then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor and lead him on a horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the robe and the horse and do just as you suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything that you have recommended. You can just imagine what Haman feels like right now. He is humiliated and he has to do this or he's going to be killed. And so all of the grand suggestions that he gave to the king, now he has to give to Mordecai. Here we go. So Haman got the robe and the horse, and he robed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man whom the king delights to honor. He was probably mortified. Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate. Now let's listen here. Mordecai has just been given the highest honor. He has just worn the king's robe, ridden on the king's horse, paraded about all through town, saying that he's the most honored man in the whole place. And he goes back to work at the king's gate as a humble man, not seeking honor or praise. And what happened? Haman, he didn't go back to work. He went home, and his head was covered in grief, and he told his wife and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisors and his wife said to him, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of the Jewish religion, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. While they were still talking to him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared. So Haman was supposed to go back to work. Since he went home, a eunuch had to come and get him and bring him back to the palace to get to that banquet. Chapter 7. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet, and they were drinking wine on a second day. The king asked again, Queen Esther, What is your petition? It will be given to you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. Then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. This is the first time that the king is going to be aware that she's a Jew. King Xerxes asked, she said, for I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he, the man who has dared to do such a thing? Esther said, an adversary and an enemy, this vile Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. The king got up in a rage. He left his wine and went out to the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Esther was sitting on one of the golden couches. Haman is falling all over her, begging her for his life. And just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house? Providence, God's providence, that he happened to walk back into the palace at that precise moment that Mordecai is falling on Esther. And so as soon as that word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. That's what happens to a condemned man, is they put a sack over his face, because a king is not to look upon a dead man or a man sentenced to death. So they put a hat over, or a sack over his face. And then Harbona, now this is probably the same eunuch that went and got Haman to bring him to the banquet. He said, I saw a gallows in front of his house, 50 feet in height, and it stands in front of Haman's house. He had it set up for Mordecai, and for Mordecai, the one who spoke up to save you. And the king said, hang him on it. So they hung Haman in the gallows that he had set up for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. Only God and a sense of humor. His enemies in a place of his righteous. Chapter 8. The king's edict in behalf of the Jews. That same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. Now let's just think about this for a minute. We have Esther, a Jew, and Mordecai, a Jew, second in command in this pagan nation of Persia who owns the world. And how many times has this happened? Let's look at the past. Let's look at Egypt, the first empire. Joseph became second in command, didn't he? Because he got them out of the famine that they were in. Joseph, a Jew, second of command of the Egyptian empire. Then we have Babylon. Daniel, second in command to Nebuchadnezzar, because he was able to interpret dreams. Then after Babylon, we have Persia. We have Esther and Mordecai, second in command to the king of Persia. What's after Persia? The Greeks. What did we have for the Greeks? Hanukkah. The Jewish people conquered the Syrians the Greeks from their land in Hanukkah. So that's the Greek Empire. What's the empire after that? The Roman Empire. We are still under the rule of the Roman Empire. They have never been defeated. Now they're existing as the revived Roman Empire under the name of the European Union. And so who is going to conquer that kingdom? That will be Jesus Christ himself. So we have a Jew at the head of every government in the history of the world. And Jesus conquering the last government and all other governments toppling after that, because they're all connected. We have Greek stuff going on in the world. We have Roman stuff going on. We have remnants of the past governments in our society today. And when Jesus conquers that last empire, he's going to topple every other empire after that and establish his own righteous empire. So let me get back here to to Esther. The king took off his signet ring and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther again pleaded with the king, falling at his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she arose and stood before him. If it pleases the king, she said, and if he regards me with favor and thinks it's the right thing to do, and if he's pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in all of the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family? So King Xerxes answered her, and he said, I have sealed that edict with my signet ring, and it cannot be revoked. But I will allow you to make another edict helping your people in any way in which you choose to ward it. And so Esther did just that. She made another edict, and it was effective the very day that the Jews were to be destroyed. So on the 13th of Adar, there was an edict to have the Jews destroyed. And on the 13th of Adar, there was an edict for the Jews to be able to defend themselves. Okay? Let me catch up. The king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate the armed men of any nationality or province who might attack them and their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. The wording on this edict is exactly like Haman's wording. He said, I want to destroy, kill, and annihilate the Jewish people. Esther's edict reads, they have the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate their enemies. So here we have two edicts for the same day. This doesn't give them victory. This gives them hope. And when they wrote this edict, they had, again, the fastest horses in the king's palace to give the edict to every province in the world. And why were they in such a rush to do that? It was to calm their fears of the Jews. It wasn't going to happen for another 9 months. Another edict came 3 months after the first edict. And so they had plenty of time, but they wanted to calm the fears of the Jewish people. So right away they got this edict out here, and the Jews were rejoicing, and they knew that they were going to gain victory. So verse 15, when Mordecai left the king's presence, he was wearing royal garments of blue and white, and a large crown of gold, and a purple robe of fine linen. And the city of Susa held a joyous celebration, for the Jews it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. In every province and every city to which the edict of the king came, there was joy and gladness among the Jews, with feasting and celebrating. And many people of other nationalities became Jews because the fear of the Jews had seized them. So what do we have going on here? We not only have the Jews not being annihilated, but we have them saving themselves and adding to their number. So they are a larger group now rather than a smaller one. Chapter 9. On the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the edict commanded by the king was to be carried out. On this day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but now the tables were turned, and the Jews got the upper hand over those who hated them. The Jews assembled in their cities in all the provinces of King Xerxes to attack those determined to destroy them. No one could stand against them because the people of all the other nationalities were afraid of them. And all of the nobles of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and the king's administrators helped the Jews because fear of Mordecai had seized them. Mordecai is now in second in command. Do you think that they're all going to go against him and kill his own people? No. They're going to go along with Mordecai and help save his people. And even though their enemies were armed and trained and able to defeat the Jews, the spirit of the world was overturned and everybody was on the side of Mordecai, and the Jews, God gained victory over their enemies and saved the Jewish race. So the Jews, verse 5, struck down all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and they did what they pleased. They also killed the 10 sons of Haman. But they did not lay their hands on their plunder. Now, I'm going to explain this. I wonder if I should do it now. I'm going to do it now. Okay? I'm going to explain this. Haman was an Agagite. Now, if you will look back in 1 Samuel chapter 15, you will see that God had hired Saul to be the ruler of Israel. He is David's son. And God knew what was going to happen in the future with the Agagites. And so he gave an order to Saul to see if he would follow his orders to the T in faith. And he didn't. It says here, chapter 15, 1 Samuel. Samuel is a prophet. Samuel said to Saul, I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. So now listen to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they were coming out of Egypt. Now go and attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. So Saul summoned the men and mustered them to Telaim, 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 from Judah. And Saul went to the city of Amalek and set an ambush in the ravine. Then he said to the Kenites, go away. I'm not after you. I'm after the Amalekites. Then verse 7, then Saul attacked the Amalekites all the way from Havilah-shur near the eastern border of Egypt. He took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive, and all his people he totally destroyed with the sword. But Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and cattle, fat calves and lambs, everything that was good. These they were unwilling to destroy completely, but everything that was despised and weak they totally destroyed. You know, we look in the Old Testament and we think, you know, look at all this bloodshed and killing. But we don't understand the architect of the world. God has made the nations. And unless you know how to make a world, we cannot judge the Creator. He knows what he's doing. And so he saw in the forecast, he knows the beginning from the end. He saw what these Agagites were going to do to his people in the book of Esther. The Agagites were going to try once again to destroy the Jewish race. So in order to cut this off at the head, he asked Saul to destroy them. Now, if he would have done that, we would have never had the incident in Esther. But because he disobeyed, the Jewish nation was again being threatened. And so, what does it say here? Saul lost his crown that day. He was no longer king of Israel. He was being punished. He did not obey. You know, we have to trust. No matter what God asks us to do, we have to trust and have faith. Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel. I regret that I have made Saul king, because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. Samuel was angry, and he cried out to the Lord all night. Early in the morning, Samuel got up and went to meet with Saul. When Samuel reached him, Saul said, "The Lord bless you. I have carried out the Lord's instructions." But Samuel said, What then is this bleating of sheep in my ears? What is this lowing of cattle that I hear? Saul answered, "The soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. They spared the best of the sheep and the cattle to sacrifice to the Lord, but we totally destroyed the rest." "Enough," Samuel said to Saul. "Let me tell you what the Lord said to me last night." "Tell me," Saul replied. Samuel said, "Although you were once small in your own eyes, did you not become the head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king of Israel, and he sent you on a mission, saying, 'Go and completely destroy those wicked people, the Amalekites. Wage war against them until you have wiped them out.' Why did you not obey the Lord? Why did you pounce on the plunder and do evil in the sights of the Lord?" "But I did obey the Lord," Saul said. "I went on a mission the Lord had assigned me. I completely destroyed the Amalekites and brought back Agag, their king. The soldiers took the sheep and the cattle from the plunder, the best of what was devoted to God, in order to sacrifice them to the Lord." But Samuel replied, "Does the Lord desire sacrifices, or is it as much as obeying the Lord? To obey is better than to sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. So, because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king." And so Agag was able to reproduce again, and the race was able to continue on. And now we have here in Esther, we have Haman, this evil Agagite, a descendant of King Agag. And so when it says in chapter 9 verse 8 or 10 that they did not lay their hands on the plunder, it was because of what happened with Saul. And listen, Mordecai is from the tribe of Benjamin, which means he's related to Saul. So Mordecai knew who Saul was. He knows what happened with the Agagites, and he knows Haman was an Agagite. And that is a big reason why he did not bow down to him. He knows the story. Okay, so let me find my place. Okay, here we go to another big thing I have to tell you. Verse 13. Now remember, they've already killed all their enemies. They've killed the 10 sons of Haman. Now listen to verse 13. "If it pleases the king," Esther answered, "give the Jews in Susa..." Oh, I gotta stop. All right, I'll continue on in the next video. I'm over time. I'll see you in a minute.